Hi, Dr. Linhart. So the theme or the center of this video will be the question raised in class: are all lives equally meaningful? And my first question raised with that would be the one that was also mentioned in class. What's the definition of meaningful in that question? Because I think that really can change how you answer this question. Like meaningful to me, meaningful to the earth, meaningful to God. I think that can really change how we answer this question. And so I'd like to highlight 3 authors' thoughts on this, interpreted by me. So it might not be right, but this is kind of what I think to take away from these authors. Albert Schweitzer, I feel like he just was so actively involved in solving the problem of poverty. And so I feel like he would see impoverished people as equally valuable, equally significant or meaningful. I would almost argue that he may not view people who are not actively trying to solve poverty the same way, equally as meaningful, because I think this was just really the main problem on his heart. And then the second writer would be C.S. Lewis. I would argue that he thinks everyone is equal in God's eyes, but he might say that Christian life may be viewed as more meaningful because they have a higher purpose and eternal life. But again, if I would read up more on him, my opinion might change on that, but that's kind of what I took away from this writing. And then the most interesting writer was Dorothy to me, on the life of Therese Lisieux. On page 158, she says, "Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth." And I think that was just a really important quote to me, kind of to highlight. I think that should always be our prayer. And then on page 159, she says she could choose between marriage, single life, or life in the convent. And she says that seems so interesting because those girls seem to live freely and be able to do as they felt God was calling them to do. However, I think she almost contradicts herself on page 161 as she explains all the rules and things that came with living in the convent. Such as like extensive prayer time, just a bunch of things in that, like reading the Bible, sewing in her chamber or whatever. All those things seemed not super free to me. However, that was what attracted her to the convent, so I thought that was interesting. And then the most powerful quote, I think, in her writing said, "On the one hand, he is God. He is closer than the air we breathe, and on the other hand, we are the grain of sand on the seashore, lost in a nothingness before the all-powerful." That explains to me very well how I view God. I think at times he feels closer than my own breath, just a loving, close God. And on the other hand, he is so all-powerful and big, and knows everything and everyone. And that kind of makes him seem so far away. And so that kind of makes me feel as the grain of sand on the seashores. So I thought that was just a powerful quote. I think it's interesting that Dorothy writes about Therese because they had such a different life, yet Dorothy was so inspired by Therese. And then for myself, I think I almost have 2 opinions on this, depending on how I see meaningful. As a 3 on the Enneagram, as an achiever, I would say, people who live like Dorothy are more meaningful because they really do something for the earth. And Therese said that she gave up her life for love, or to love, but it's hard for me to see in what practical way she loved. She just learned to love God. And at the same time, on the other hand, as a Christian, obviously every life is just as meaningful. God created everyone, and those 2 are kind of just hard to mesh in my head. But yeah, those are my views on meaningful.